In the 21st century, it's really not all that much of a commitment to tell someone that you love them. And by contrast, it's really a much more serious commitment with much more serious consequences for both of you if you tell someone that you do not love them. Love can mean different things in different contexts to different people. There are many different types of loving relationships, and one and the same loving relationship can change a lot from one period of your life to another. But not loving someone, not caring about someone, not taking responsibility for them, what that means and what it entails is very clear. And the case study of the Paul brothers and their relationship with Alissa Violet, it's a peculiar example that leads me to reflect on how many people think they're protecting themselves by refusing to commit, by refusing to care, by refusing to be in love, and they find out that instead they've made themselves all the more vulnerable or have set themselves up for a disaster of some kind. I digress to note, here on this channel, I like to talk about issues in a way that will still be interesting to me if I come back and watch this video 5 years from now, when the controversy of the moment has long been forgotten. I also try to only talk about the controversy of the moment if I feel I have something really meaningful and important to say, something that maybe one day my own daughter or my own grandchildren might watch and find some value in hearing me saying. So I just note, there is a controversy passing momentarily right now. A series of videos by Shane Dawson talking about the love life of several YouTubers. I'm just going to call them the brothers Paul. Two brothers who ended up having a love affair with the same woman. And, acrimony then emerged between the two of them. I only ended up watching this series of videos because it promised to deal with the subject of sociopathy with certain diagnosed mental disorders, and I think the politics and public perception of those disorders. And that's a topic that does interest me. I was not interested, at least at the beginning of this process, in the personal life of Jake Paul and Logan Paul. Just not something I would have watched a video about intentionally. But that drew me in, and then I did watch this series through to its conclusion. So, with that having been said, probably none of you in clicking on this video thought that I was going to mention the 19th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant is an incredibly boring philosopher who's backed up by the entire academic establishment. So many of you, if you have a university education, you may have been forced to read some of Immanuel Kant. There's a quip from Immanuel Kant, or a funny anecdote preserved in his philosophy, that would not be well known if it were not followed up immediately by a racist remark. So this passage gets quoted in discussions of how racist was Immanuel Kant and how much does it matter his philosophy. That's not why I'm quoting it here, as you'll soon see. Immanuel Kant quotes an anecdote from an explorer from some group of Europeans who were exploring Africa or traveling in remote regions of Africa. And it was in a region of Africa where the culture was predominantly Islamic, predominantly Muslim. And a local man, who was a black African, but I think culturally Islamic, remarked to these Europeans, I don't understand you people. I don't understand your culture. You say that you give your women all of these freedoms. But if they actually use them, then you go crazy. If the women actually use in practice the theory, if they use the freedoms that you say they have in theory, then you guys fly off the handle. And I think the original wording also implied that they'd beat their wives, which of course at that time was much more common than it is today. Many of these cultures, it was considered a normal practice for husbands to beat their wives up until a few decades ago. Anyway, I forget the precise wording. Anyway, Immanuel Kant then follows up this somewhat interesting anecdote by making a racist statement against black people. And that's why the passage is well known. That's the only reason I ended up reading that passage. But the racism of Immanuel Kant has nothing to do with what I want to talk about in this video. That anecdote makes an interesting point. And whether young men or old are involved in these scenarios, whether they call what they're doing an open relationship or not a relationship at all, it's very easy for them to deceive themselves as to what it will really mean to them in practice if they, as the anecdote says, give these women these freedoms. What will be the consequences for them, personally or emotionally, if they actually use them? And now, conversely, if you're giving someone these freedoms, if you're saying it's okay for you to sleep with other men, which was the situation for Jake Paul, he was in a relationship of some kind with Alissa. If you say that it's okay for her to sleep with other people because you yourself intend to sleep with other people, what will be the consequences for you when that actually happens? Again, Jake Paul, he showed himself to be a hypocrite on this. He did exactly what the anecdote suggests. He went crazy. He had an emotional breakdown. He couldn't handle it when, in fact, she used the freedom that she was indeed entitled to. So at this point, you guys will already have started to pick up on the fact that in this scenario, I actually put 100% of the blame on Jake Paul. I actually don't put any of the blame on the woman involved, Alissa, and I don't put any of the blame on the other brother. This is a scenario in which Jake Paul let it be known privately and publicly, again and again, that he was not in a relationship with this woman, that he did not love her, that he did not care for her, that they were not in any way exclusive or even dating or in a real relationship. So if you're giving her that liberty or giving her that status, you are in no position whatsoever to complain when she actually does make use of that freedom. And in this case, yes, that even does extend to your own brother sleeping with her. Now, it's not merely hypothetical to invert the situation and ask, how would the woman feel, how would Alissa feel, if Jake Paul had slept with her sister? It's not hypothetical. And here's what I mean. Jake Paul slept with a woman whom Alissa described as having been her best friend and her closest confidant, living in the same house at the same time. The woman who is today publicly the girlfriend of Jake Paul, I believe her name is Erica, the woman who today is his girlfriend, was previously the best friend of his ex-girlfriend. They lived together. They were on intimate terms. She shared with this woman her own sorrows, including her sorrows about how the relationship with Jake was going. So the type of betrayal involved in Jake having slept with both of them, or having cheated on one with the other, depending on what kind of perspective you want to bring to it, whether or not the word cheating can be used at all in this context, because it's an open relationship, blah, blah, blah. The relationship that those two women had was actually much closer than most people's relationship with their own sister or their own brother. I've never shared a house or shared an apartment with any of my brothers and sisters. I've never once confided in my brothers or sisters about problems I was having when dating someone in my love life or that kind of deeply personal issue. Never. And in terms of Western English-speaking society, I'm not that unusual. It's not that unusual to be kind of estranged from, just not to have very close relationships with your brothers and sisters. So she did have someone in her life who was in a sister-like relationship with her, and he did actually cross the same line with absolutely no regard to the consequences for her or regard to the consequences for the other people involved in this Gordian knot. So I come back to this simple idea. It is not all that much of a commitment in the year 2018 to tell somebody that you love them. In many ways, that's just the start of a longer conversation. But it's a very gravely serious commitment to tell them that you don't love them, that you're never going to love them, that it doesn't matter how many times they sleep with you or how many gifts they give you or how many times they take you to dinner. It's never going to progress. You're never going to take responsibility for them in that way. I'm going to say more about that, the role of responsibility, that you're never going to become a real couple, etc. Do you think in the span of time covered by these anecdotes, none of the people ever came down with the common cold? Do you think none of them ever came down with stomach flu or a urinary tract infection? I mentioned that because actually Alissa has referred repeatedly to getting urinary tract infections on our YouTube channel during this time. What happens when you get sick in that scenario? This is, I think, the fundamental reason why monogamy is the most popular mode of dating, or not to mention marriage, the world over, even amongst people who are not Christian or not religious in any sense, or who may not even have culturally driven reasons to accept it. If you have just one person in your life, one girlfriend or one boyfriend, when that person comes down with the flu, you say, okay, I'm going to cancel my plans to go see a movie. I'm going to cancel our plans to go and see a concert together, to go and see a basketball game or whatever it was. I'm going to cancel our plans to go skiing, and I'm going to sit down here with you, and I'm going to care for you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make you feel better and help you get through this illness. And that is a kind of responsibility, and that is a kind of love. It's a kind of loving relationship that most people don't think about under the heading of romantic love, but very soon after the initial stages of flirtation and dating, it's a very large part of the practical experience of what it means to be loved by someone or to love someone else. If you have multiple women in your life, as Jake Paul did, and you tell all of them that you don't love them, that you're not going to take care of them, that you're not going to take responsibility for them, then that means you have tickets to go and see a concert, and you say, oh, you're sick? Okay, I'll take someone else. Oh, you're sick? Well, I'm going to go skiing anyway. That was an example I actually dealt with in these videos. Oh, you have a urinary tract infection. Well, then I'll just have sex with someone else anyway. The lack of care, the lack of responsibility, especially in a scenario where these people are living under the same roof, eating out of the same fridge, in the same kitchen, there are no words to describe how much resentment can build up in that scenario. There's a kind of false intimacy and false dependency that's created by people living together in close quarters that way. I had an experience early in life. It would have been the age when most people are in their first year of university, and it concerned a girl who was, I think, about a year and a half older than me. And so she was already into university. I didn't know she was in love with me. She didn't show any signs to me directly, and later I figured out she'd actually broken down crying with other people, mutual friends we had in common, talking about how much she was in love with me. And something I did that made it worse, which I didn't even think about at the time, she once phoned me up, I think it was just to cancel, so she couldn't come to some event, telling me that she'd come down with the flu. And I knew her situation. She was young, in college, had her own apartment. She was all alone. And she didn't have in her apartment the things that her parents would have provided for her when she had a cold or a flu. And I had no money to speak of, but I took a few dollars, and I didn't tell her I was going to do this. I think I just told her I'd stop by. I took a few dollars, and I went to the pharmacy, and I bought her lozenges, horrible cough syrup, kind that lines your throat, those miscellaneous antibiotic, helping you get over cold and cough type of over-the-counter medicines. I bought her a meal. I don't remember what the meal was I bought her. I wasn't vegan then, but I brought her some food. And I remember distinctly that I bought her a digital thermometer. Because I don't think she told me, I knew she wouldn't even have a thermometer. But it's possible on the phone she said to me that she had a fever and was worried about it, but she couldn't take her temperature. It's possible she said something like that to me, and that's why I bought her the thermometer. So I kind of put together this bundle of things to help her. And I got on the bus and went up to her apartment, and I just visited her. I wasn't there for very long when she was sick. She was lying in bed feeling like crap. And, we didn't talk a lot, obviously. But I brought her this stuff and got her set up, and I kind of set up the food, put it on a plate for her, and, she remained lying in bed under the covers. So I put this sort of food next to her, and I said, okay, here's this medicine, here's these lozenges. And then I said goodbye, and I left, And from my perspective, her and I were just friends. But looking back on it now, I can see that probably was a turning point for her, where she went from maybe having a crush on me to her really feeling like she was in love with me, or even feeling like she was entitled to be in a relationship with me, kind of feeling wronged that I wasn't in a relationship with her. And, I never kissed this girl, or not at this point anyway. Later in the story, she pounced on me when I was drunk once. That's kind of another story. But there was no ambiguity from my side. I wasn't interested in being in a romantic relationship with her, or sexual of any kind whatsoever. And the lesson that was to be learned there is really simple, but I didn't want to learn it. I didn't want to think that we live in a world where it's bad and wrong to do something that's so wholesome and helpful and nice, and something that I wish somebody else would do for me if our positions were reversed. And the inevitable conclusion of that anecdote, which I still don't really want to accept today, is, well, you have to be really careful about who you help, even if it's with a gesture this friendly, this harmless, this helpful, because that can create, emotional ties that really bind. And the reverse is also true. You live together with someone in a house, as these three people in the love triangle did. Your brother is involved with your coworker who lives in the same house with you. And all of those people at some point have the experience of being sick and alone. And you're not there, and you're not taking responsibility for them. And again, it may be the most trivial illness. It may be a urinary tract infection. It may be the common cold. But you're in the position of having other women to chase and other things to do, and of just not caring. That experience creates the kind of resentment, ties that bind in a negative sense, that then explains the somewhat crazy, over-the-top, and vengeful behavior of the woman in this scenario, who did, of course, go out of her way to try to really hurt the feelings of Jake Paul. That's all I have to say, people. From my perspective, Jake Paul, the blame and responsibility for the scenario is 100% on you. If you give someone the freedom to sleep with others, and you claim that freedom for yourself, and you say that you don't love them, the statement that you don't love them, that you're never going to love them, that you're not progressing towards a real relationship, that has serious consequences. And you wimped out when it really mattered, because you were the one who couldn't deal with those consequences at all.